An officer's racist stop, a driver's unwavering calm. He had no idea the man he targeted was about to reveal a shocking truth that would shake his world to its core, forever changing. The California sun, a canvas of gold and crimson, began its gentle descent over Sacramento. David Miller, tired from a demanding day, longed for the quiet comfort of his home. His sleek sedan hummed a soft tune, the cool air conditioning a welcome relief from the city's lingering heat. A calming melody drifted from the radio, a perfect balm for a weary soul. As he neared an intersection, the traffic light ahead glowed a hesitant yellow. David slowed, just as it abruptly shifted to an angry red. Suddenly, a blinding eruption of blue and red lights filled his rearview mirror, accompanied by the piercing shriek of a police siren. His brow furrowed in a slight frown. He smoothly guided his car to the curb, rolling down his window as the patrol cruiser halted behind him. Officer Mark Jensen, a man in his mid-30s with a stern buzz cut and a badge glinting on his chest, emerged. Jensen adjusted his belt, his movements radiating an almost palpable arrogance as he strode toward David's vehicle, clearly accustomed to holding all the cards. "License and registration, please," Jensen commanded, his voice devoid of warmth, yet heavy with assumed authority. David, without a word, calmly retrieved his documents from the glove compartment, his actions precise and unhurried. He felt Jensen's sharp gaze, a predatory scan, as if searching for any hint of transgression. "Do you have any idea why I pulled you over?" Jensen pressed, leaning closer to the window. "I'm not entirely sure, officer," David responded, his tone polite but firm, betraying no agitation. "You didn't come to a complete stop at the light," Jensen stated, though David detected a subtle waver in his voice. David nodded slightly, acknowledging the claim. "I understand. I believed I slowed sufficiently, but I accept your assessment." Jensen didn't immediately reply. Instead, he lingered, his eyes narrowing, his scrutiny intensifying. This wasn't a mere traffic stop for him anymore. It was something more. His posture subtly stiffened, as if he'd already decided this was no minor offense. He glanced at David's license. "You're not from around here, are you?" he probed. David paused for a fraction of a second. "I moved here a few months ago," he began. "My address is clearly listed, but—" Jensen wasn't truly listening. His questions were taking on an unsettling edge, hinting that his concern had shifted far beyond a simple traffic violation. David's calm, composed demeanor seemed to irritate him, making him lean in closer. "So, where were you rushing off to?" "Just heading home," David answered, his voice unwavering. Yet the atmosphere between them had subtly, undeniably shifted. Jensen no longer saw just a driver. He saw something else entirely, something that fueled his suspicion. David felt the tension escalate, but he didn't flinch. Oh, how little Officer Jensen knew. This serene exterior wasn't naivety. It was absolute self-possession, and this was only the beginning. Jensen stepped back, deliberately, almost theatrically, folding David's documents before tucking them into his chest pocket. He straightened, a faint smirk playing on his lips, as if his judgment of the man before him was already sealed. "Please step out of the car for me," Jensen ordered. David's fingers tightened briefly on the steering wheel, but his expression remained impassive. "Is there a particular reason, officer?" he asked, his voice measured. Jensen's lips twitched, quickly masked. "I asked you to exit the vehicle. Let's not make this any more difficult than it needs to be." The unspoken threat hung heavy, unmistakable. David exhaled slowly and opened the door. As he emerged, Jensen's eyes raked over him, assessing. David stood a little taller than the officer, his shoulders broad, yet his presence remained unthreatening. His impeccably tailored suit spoke of professionalism. His polished shoes hinted at meticulousness. None of it seemed to matter to Jensen. The officer gestured toward the front of the car. "Hands where I can see them." David complied, his movements calm and precise. "Is there something specific you're searching for, Officer Jensen?" A faint smirk touched Jensen's lips. "Just routine. We've had a few incidents recently. Can't be too careful, you know." David turned his head slightly, his gaze locking with Jensen's. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans?" Or is there something deeper at play here? The question landed like a physical blow, and for a fleeting moment, Jensen's arrogance wavered. He straightened up, his hand instinctively drifting toward his belt. "Watch your tone," he snapped, his voice hardening. "I'm simply asking a question," David replied, his voice devoid of defiance, possessing a quiet, unsettling firmness that clearly put the officer on edge. Jensen leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "You seem awfully familiar with this process. Got something to conceal?" David allowed the silence to stretch a beat or two before answering. "No, officer. I simply believe in clarity regarding police interactions. Transparency, you understand?" Jensen scoffed but offered no reply. He stepped back, pacing a small circle in front of the car. The power dynamic was subtly shifting in ways he couldn't quite grasp. David wasn't reacting like most people. There was no fear, no stuttering, no nervous fidgeting. Instead, there was an unwavering control, an unsettling poise that put Jensen on edge. "You seem awfully confident," Jensen mumbled, almost to himself. "Like you know exactly what's coming next." David didn't take the bait. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. "Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is." Jensen froze for a split second, then turned back to face David. The smugness had vanished, replaced by something sharper, almost offensive. He opened his mouth to retort, but the words caught in his throat. David's composure was completely throwing him off balance, and he hated it. As the silence stretched, the tension between them crackled like electricity. Jensen was slowly realizing this wouldn't unfold as he'd expected, but instead of retreating, he dug in deeper. The true test was about to begin. Jensen's fingers drummed against the holster at his hip, his frustration barely contained. He wasn't accustomed to being challenged, especially not by someone like David. His gaze flickered back to the sedan, as if searching for some phantom justification. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," Jensen barked, his voice clipped. "I need to check for weapons." "Weapons?" David repeated, his tone incredulous but still calm. "Do I look like someone who carries a weapon?" Jensen's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, his facade cracked. "I'm not asking again." David hesitated, an unreadable flicker in his eyes. Then without a word, he turned, placing his palms flat against the warm metal of his car's hood. Jensen approached, the crunch of his boots on the asphalt shattering the uneasy quiet. The officer patted David down with quick, rough movements, his hands lingering a little too long. It wasn't just a search. It was a deliberate attempt to assert dominance, to provoke a reaction. But David didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't even stir under the invasive scrutiny. "You're clean," Jensen muttered, stepping back, the admission sounding grudging, as if he were annoyed at his failure to find anything. David turned to face him, his expression calm, his eyes sharp. "Of course I am," he said simply. "Now, officer, if you're finished—" "I'm not finished," Jensen interrupted, his voice rising, words tumbling out too quickly, betraying his desperate need for control. "You seem to know an awful lot about what I can and cannot do. Care to explain why?" David folded his arms, his posture relaxed despite the crackling tension. "I've had my share of encounters with law enforcement," he said. "Let's just say I've learned quite a bit over the years." Jensen's eyes narrowed. "Oh, really? Are you a lawyer or something?" David offered a faint smile. "Or something." The ambiguity seemed to inflame Jensen further. He stepped closer, invading David's personal space, his voice dropping to a low snarl. "Listen, do you think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this?" David met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't think anything, officer. I simply believe in fairness, and so far, I'm not seeing much of it here." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Jensen took the bait. "Fairness? You think fairness is what this is about? People like you always—" He stopped himself abruptly, the unspoken words hanging in the air like a noxious cloud. David's expression remained unchanged, but a subtle, unmistakable shift in his posture conveyed that he had caught every implication of what Jensen hadn't said. "People like me?" David repeated, his voice soft, yet charged with profound meaning. Jensen bristled, stepping back as if realizing he'd just crossed an irreversible line. "You know what I mean," he muttered, though his tone now lacked its earlier conviction. "I think I do," David replied quietly. His calmness was no longer passive. It was razor-sharp, cutting through the pretense like a blade. "And I think we both know this interaction stopped being about a traffic violation a long, long time ago." Jensen opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time, he looked genuinely uncertain, unsure how to proceed. The balance of power was undeniably shifting, and for the first time, Jensen was on shaky ground. But the true moment of reckoning was still to come, a moment he would never ever forget. David's voice broke the heavy silence, steady and unyielding. "Officer, I believe it's time you knew who I am." Jensen's brows knitted, his irritation resurfacing. "I don't care who you are," he shot back, though a faint tremor in his voice betrayed his bravado. David reached into his inner jacket pocket, his movements slow, deliberate. "I'm reaching for my badge," he said calmly, watching Jensen's hand twitch near his holstered weapon. "No need for theatrics. I simply want you to see it." The words hung, heavy with unspoken weight. Jensen's eyes followed David's hand as he pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gleaming badge. "David Miller," David stated, his tone as casual as if introducing himself to a neighbor. "Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division." Jensen froze. His eyes darted to the badge, then back to David's face, searching for any sign of a cruel joke. But there was no humor in David's expression. Only quiet, unyielding authority and a hint of profound disappointment. "Internal Affairs?" Jensen repeated, his voice cracking. "You're—" "Yes," David interrupted, sparing him the struggle to finish. "I oversee officer conduct. My job is to ensure that those who wear this badge uphold the integrity and values it is meant to represent." Jensen's face paled, his confident demeanor crumbling in real time. He took a small, involuntary step back, his hand falling away from his belt, as if the very weight of his own authority had suddenly become unbearable. David took a step forward, closing the gap Jensen had instinctively created. "Do you know what the most disturbing part of this interaction has been, Officer Jensen?" he asked, his voice calm, yet piercing. Jensen offered no reply. He looked like a man who had stumbled into quicksand, utterly lost. "It's not the profiling," David continued, "though that is egregious enough. It's not even the baseless escalation. It's the fact that you did all of this without even realizing who you were speaking to. You assumed I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't understand the very laws you're sworn to uphold. And why, Officer Jensen?" Jensen opened his mouth, but no words emerged. David's gaze bore into him, relentless. "Because I didn't fit your preconceived notion of someone deserving respect," David finished for him. His words weren't angry, but they carried the crushing weight of an indictment. "And that, officer, is not just a problem for me. That's a problem for every single person you encounter while wearing that uniform." Jensen's shoulders sagged, the full impact of David's words landing squarely upon him. He glanced down at the badge in David's hand again, as if it might simply vanish if he didn't look too closely. David stepped back, allowing Jensen a moment to breathe, but his voice didn't lose its sharp edge. "Here's what will happen," he stated. "You will take a step back, return my documents, and consider very carefully what you say next." Jensen's lips parted, but he hesitated, clearly debating whether to resist or comply. That hesitation cost him dearly. Then David added, his voice lowering slightly, "You will hear from me again. Not as a driver you stopped on the roadside, but as the man tasked with determining your fitness to wear that badge." Jensen swallowed hard, his face reddening as the profound weight of the moment truly sank in. He reached into his chest pocket, pulling out David's license and registration, his hands trembling slightly as he handed them over. David took them without a word, tucking them into his wallet. He moved toward the driver's side door of his car, pausing with one hand on the handle. He looked over his shoulder, meeting Jensen's gaze one last time. "Remember this, Officer Jensen," David said. "The badge doesn't make you superior to anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." As David slid back into his car and started the engine, Jensen was left standing in the fading light, his confidence shattered, his future hanging precariously. But for David, this was far from over. His next action would send ripples throughout the entire department, The drive home was quiet, yet David's mind buzzed with activity. The encounter replayed in his thoughts, not because it was unique, but because it was tragically common. Jensen wasn't the first officer David had encountered like this, and he knew he wouldn't be the last. But this time, things would be different. This time, David possessed the authority to enact real change. The next morning, David sat at his desk, the early sunlight streaming through the blinds of his office within the Sacramento Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. A file lay open before him. Officer Mark Jensen. His record was far from clean. Minor complaints of unprofessional conduct, excessive stops, and vague misunderstandings that had consistently gone unaddressed. David leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled, contemplating the wider implications. Jensen wasn't an isolated case. He was a symptom of a much deeper, systemic problem, and David had no interest in simply patching over a gaping wound. A soft knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant, Sarah, stepped in, holding a stack of reports. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. I have the summary of last month's misconduct cases. Also, Chief Thompson wanted me to remind you about the department review next week." David nodded, taking the files from her. "Thank you, Sarah. Could you also schedule a meeting with Chief Thompson for this afternoon? There's something important I need to discuss with him." Sarah hesitated, sensing the gravity in David's tone. "Of course," she replied before quietly excusing herself. David's attention returned to Jensen's file, but his focus wasn't solely on the officer. This was larger than one man, larger than one interaction. It was about the pervasive culture that allowed officers like Jensen to feel justified in their biased behavior. And if David knew one thing, it was that culture ultimately stemmed from the top. Later that afternoon, David sat across from Chief Thompson in a quiet conference room. Thompson, a seasoned veteran with distinguished salt and pepper hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, leaned back, listening intently as David recounted the traffic stop. "I could have dismissed it as just another negative interaction," David stated, his voice steady but resolute. "But that would have been a grave mistake. Officer Jensen's behavior isn't an anomaly, Chief. It's a stark reflection of how much work we still have ahead of us." Thompson rubbed his temples, exhaling slowly. "This isn't the first time Jensen's name has come up, I admit," he conceded. "But we've always handled it internally, discreetly." "And that's precisely the problem," David countered. "Discretion doesn't fix anything. Discretion allows it to persist. It's time we become vocal." Thompson looked at him, the weight of their conversation etched onto his face. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A comprehensive department-wide review," David declared without hesitation. "Not just of individual officers, but of our training programs, our established protocols, our entire accountability system. We can no longer sweep these issues under the rug. If we fail to hold ourselves to the highest standard, how can we possibly expect our community to trust us?" Thompson leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "You're going to upset a lot of people with this, David." "Good," David replied simply. "It's about time someone did." The ensuing weeks were a whirlwind of relentless meetings, intensive interviews, and countless reports. David worked tirelessly, compiling crucial data, engaging with officers, and hosting public forums to hear directly from the community. The Jensen incident became a potent catalyst for change, a pivotal turning point that compelled the department to confront its deep-seated flaws head-on. Jensen, for his part, faced an internal hearing. David made no secret of his direct involvement, sitting across from Jensen during the proceedings, observing as the officer squirmed under the intense scrutiny. The hearing resulted in a suspension, but David understood that the true victory wasn't merely in punishing Jensen. It was in actively preventing the emergence of another Jensen. Months later, David stood at the podium of a major community event, addressing a packed room of officers, city officials, and local residents. He spoke not of blame, but of profound responsibility, of their shared obligation to forge a system that truly served everyone. His words were more than a call for accountability. They were an unwavering promise of transformation. "Justice isn't merely about apprehending criminals." David's voice resonated powerfully through the hall. "It's about ensuring that the individuals sworn to protect and serve do so with unwavering integrity, unimpeachable fairness, and profound respect for every single person they encounter. That is the badge I believe in, and that is the badge we are collectively building here, together. The applause that followed was thunderous, yet David didn't linger in the moment. For him, this wasn't the conclusion of a story, it was the vibrant beginning of a far better one. As David stepped down from the podium, he scanned the faces in the crowd, some skeptical, some filled with hopeful anticipation, but all listening intently. He knew that true change wouldn't materialize overnight, but he also knew, with absolute certainty, that it would come. And for now, that profound knowledge was enough.